Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for joining us on this very glorious evening. My name is Lucy Badnock. I'm Dean for Research here at the Courtauld and a member of the Courtauld Centre for the Art of the Americas. It is a huge pleasure and honour to welcome to you this evening Professor Charlene Villaseñor Black, who is Professor in the Art of the Americas at the University of Oxford, where she's also the first Loebler Fellow and tutor in the history of art at Worcester College. It is no overstatement to say that Professor Villaseñor Black is a world-renowned authority on both the art of Central and South America in the early modern period, and also contemporary Latinx art across the Americas, bringing to this trans-historical inquiry a very deep engagement with the histories and epistemologies of art and empire, and the decolonial praxis needed to name and confront these. Her practice is energizing and impressive. It combines deep research, imaginative vision, and methodological reorientation. Her books are numerous. I will name some of her publications this evening. They include Creating the Cult of St. Joseph, Art and Gender in the Spanish Empire from 2006, Transforming Saints from Spain to New Spain of 2022, and The Artist as Eyewitness, Antonio Bernal Papers 1884 to 2019, which won the gold medal for Best Biography in English in the International Latino Book Awards. She was co-editor of the volume Tradition and Transformation, Chicana and Chicano Art from the 1970s to the 1990s of 2014, and the Routledge Companion to Decolonizing Art History of 2023. This, as you can imagine, is work that has really shaped more than one field, and as has her editorial work as the editor of Applin, a journal of Chicano studies from 2016 to 25, and as the founding editor-in-chief of Latin American and Latinx Visual Culture, an award-winning journal published by UC Press. Professor Black joined Oxford last year from UCLA, where she was Professor of Art History and Chair of the Department of Chicano Studies and Central American Studies. And as you can imagine, news of her move to the UK was met with huge excitement, both within the field of American art history and also beyond it by the discipline at large, which will be both changed and also energized by her presence. We're really incredibly excited and lucky to be welcoming Charlene both to the UK and also tonight to the Courtauld. Tonight's lecture is organised by the Courtauld Centre for the Art of the Americas, which champions scholarship that advances critical, transnational and decolonial approaches to the art and visual culture of the Americas, broadly defined. This evening's event is supported also, of course, as usual, by the wonderful team of the Courtauld Research Forum, including Diego Arteche, Lela Bambra and Grace Williams, and a huge thanks to them. Following Professor Black's lecture, we will have some time for questions and for discussion in this room, and then we'll head along the corridor for refreshments and I'm sure more lively, informal conversation and discussion. In the meantime, please join me in welcoming Charlene Villaseñor Black.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here with everyone today. I'm going to actually start with a trigger warning, because I will be briefly discussing news related to Cesar Chavez. It's at the very beginning of the talk, just so you know. I speak today from my perspective as a Mexican American or Chicana, art historian and ethnic studies scholar, to consider the creation of art for the Chicano civil rights movement. El movimiento Chicano, as it is known in Spanish, occurred in the late 1960s and 70s and was often inspired by the African American civil rights movement in the United States. Chicanos, or Mexican Americans, were fighting for three major goals: Number 1, farm worker rights as promoted by the UFW. Number 2, land rights, especially in New Mexico. And number 3, educational reform. 2 art forms were central to the activism of the Chicano movement, murals and prints. Both were collaborative and community-centered media, and both were types of artworks that existed primarily in communities and not in elite museum spaces. In my current research, I'm particularly interested in the earliest activist artists, including Chicano muralist Antonio Bernal, Chicano photographer Luis Garza, and Chicano printmaker and painter Malaquías Montoya. How do you create a new art movement in the service of activism? What artistic choices were made and why? And how have these choices influenced the development of Chicanx art in current scholarship? As you're probably aware, the study of Chicano art, along with art produced by other minoritized groups in the United States, has long been left out of the history of U.S. American art, disregarded as not of high enough quality and too political. My own approach to the topic is informed by both the tools of art history as well as methodologies from ethnic studies, such as the use of oral histories, all viewed through a decolonial lens. I have interviewed and closely worked with 2 of the artists discussed today and been in touch over email with the third and with his family. It was these interviews and interactions with them that led me to today's topic of Chicano art and decolonial love. How can and did art create, model, and foster a love rooted in decolonizing frameworks? How did Chicano art back in the 60s and 70s and continuing up until now visualize just futures? Several concepts are important to define as we begin today. I draw decolonize from decolonial as cognizant of the coloniality of power, to use Aníbal Quijano's phrase. In short, the idea that European social order, racial hierarchies, and ways of knowing imposed during the early modern era in the Americas live on and structure the world today. And as someone who works also on this earlier time period, I'm really aware of the connections. We can think of coloniality as the Eurocentric epistemological framework forced upon our ancestors during the Spanish invasion of Mexico, 1519 to 1521, and persisting to this day. Decolonial approaches seek to recognize the damage and injuries wrought by colonialism in the historical past and the ways these affect structure and live on in the present world. Decolonial approaches seek to upend coloniality by challenging Eurocentrism and Eurocentric notions of universality. I find Walter Mignolo's concept of epistemic disobedience to be a powerful tool. For me, epistemic disobedience is the refusal to give in to Eurocentric models of thinking, being, and knowledge. What then is decolonial love? Decolonial love is a love for community and for ourselves that breaks free from coloniality. My thoughts are inspired by recent theorizing from literature and decolonial studies and by considerations of futurity and reparations. But I was also led to this framework by the artists and the artworks themselves. I've been influenced by the work of ethnic studies scholar Yomaira C. Figueroa, decolonial theorist Nelson Maldonado Torres, and others. Figueroa's brilliant study of these 2 novels by Junot Diaz, The Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde from 2007, and Joaquin Bomio Bacheng, Matinda Sangre en la Selva from 2013, suggests the ways that decolonial love is expressed in Afro-diasporic literature. Today, I try to describe how Chicanx art expressed or was an agent of decolonial love, both in the past and continuing today, and how the visual arts are particularly suited, even more so than literature, to this endeavor. Given the nature of Chicano art, created as a crucial part of the movimiento Chicano, it's not surprising that it expresses decolonial love. It was created for and in and with our communities. It was fashioned to bring injustice to light. It envisions new futures. This was an art created to better the lives of Mexican Americans, not one designed to conform to or promote mainstream arts organizations and institutions or to bring financial gain. Frequently, Chicano movement artists worked without material gain, without recognition, without museum or gallery representation. So today I argue that as embodied political subjects, Chicanx artists have been engaged in envisioning decolonial love from the beginning of the Chicano movement in the 1960s until today, creating art that brings historical wrongs to light, fighting back against injustice, repairing us in our community, and visualizing more just futures. Allow me today to suggest how these ideas manifest in what has been considered the first Chicano movement mural by artist Antonio Bernal, created in 1968 for El Teatro Campesino in Del Rey, California. Some of this is drawn from a book that I did with my students on Bernal. Painted on 2 wooden panels, the mural asserts the importance of the indigenous past. It proposes men and women as equal partners in revolution, and it highlights Black-Brown alliances. Its creation was associated with Bernal's work with the Teatro Campesino that traveled from migrant camp to migrant camp in farming communities, entertaining and politicizing Mexican and Chicano migrant workers. The 2 panels of the mural eventually were installed on the exterior of the United Farm Workers headquarters in Del Rey. Then it disappeared for many years. The panels were only recently rediscovered in 2017 and are now part of the Ultimate Art Collection. I'm going to show you so you can see it in situ. And you have a better view. The 2 compositions, each with 8 aligned figures, mirror each other. In the left panel, we see indigenous people in procession, a composition loosely based on the 8th century Maya murals at Bonampak and other Mexica or Aztec and Native North American sources. The amalgamation of costume and attributes suggests pan-indigeneity. In the right panel, Bernal presents a group of 19th and 20th century revolutionaries acting together in alliance. A little bit better view and some comparanda. And Adelita, a woman who fought during the Mexican Revolution, leading, followed by Pancho Villa, leader of the Mexican Revolution in northern Mexico, Emiliano Zapata, the indigenous leader of the revolution in the south, Joaquin Murrieta, a legendary Robin Hood figure from the U.S. gold rush who stole from rich white settlers to give to Mexicans, Cesar E. Chavez, the activist and organizer, along with Dolores Huerta of the United Farm Workers, Reyes Lopez Tijerina, leader of the New Mexico Land Rights Movement, Malcolm X, the revolutionary leader of the Black Panthers, and Martin Luther King, the visionary Black civil rights advocate. As you know, Chavez was recently revealed to have been a sexual predator, in addition to Lopez Tijerina, and the second instance made much less impact in the news. The creator of this mural, with whom I worked personally and over quite a long time, I'm positive did not know this. I contemplated cutting this example, and I'm happy to discuss this after, but I decided not to. I believe that the only way to effect change is to address what happened, as painful as that is, not to ignore or erase it. And I'm certainly open to discussion about this, and I'm aware of the pain this may cause survivors of sexual assault and abuse. I'm open to changing my mind about teaching this image and talking about it. This mural is important historically and today. The panels visually manifest revolutionary thinking in the early years of the Chicano movement as they suggest strategies for future activism. In both scenes, the processions are led by a woman, an indigenous dancer on the left and an Adelita on the right. In both, the artist references the ancient and colonial pasts, linking them to current struggles. The Mexica dancer leading in the left wears a Christian cross, a reference to the forced conversion in the colonial era. Bernal thus connects the ancient Mesoamerican past and the abuses of colonialism to the Mexican Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, and el movimiento Chicano, visualized in the panel on the right. Further, by centering the Mesoamerican past, Bernal challenges Western epistemology. He offers us a different historical beginning, not ancient Greece or Rome, but ancient Mesoamerica and the tragedy of colonization. Also significant is how he imagined women and men working together in concert, both historically and now, as well as his assertion of the important alliance between Black and Brown peoples in the United States. Finally, Bernal was also motivated by a desire to elevate Chicano heroes because he believed, like other activists, that representation mattered and matters. Through these various references, I suggest Bernal's 1968 Del Rey mural visualizes decolonial love. The paired panels bring the colonial past to light. They fight against injustice in the present moment, and through their valorization of indigeneity, they repair the community. Making past history visible is extremely important, given how the Mexican-American experience has been and continues to be erased from official U.S. histories. To paint our history, to represent our community, to make visible our politics in public murals, these were and are radical acts. Thus, the very first Chicano mural, created in 1968 for El Teatro Campesino, represents an early formulation of decolonial love in Chicanx art. Bernal's paintings weren't the only murals to do such work, and just let me show you a couple of more very briefly. A number of murals focused on current and ongoing injustices. An early example dates from 1974, the sacrifice wall created by Charles Cat Felix with a group of young men from the Barrio Nueva Estrada gang, the BNE gang, at Estrada Courts. Based on ancient Mesoamerican imagery, a ball court relief sculpture from El Tajín in Veracruz, the mural paid homage to ancient indigenous warriors as it reflected on violence in the neighborhood at the time. The disproportionate number of young Chicano men dying in the Vietnam War, deaths due to armed gang conflict, and the reality of police harassment. Also located at Estrada Courts, the black and white mural, or the moratorium mural, from 1973 to 1978, created by Julia Ronan Gronk, painted the tensions and conflicts between the Chicano community and the police. Executed in black and white in a filmic composition, it depicts police violence in response to activism, highlighting the largest and most important protests of the era, the 1968 blowouts and the Chicano moratorium march against the Vietnam War of August 29, 1970. Scenes of armed soldiers, chaos, police brutality, a close-up of a screaming face bring the experience of the Chicano community into visibility. Judith Hernandez's Homenaje a las Mujeres de Aztlán was created in 1977 at a public housing project in East Los Angeles, Ramona Gardens. Here, Hernandez brings to view women's roles in the Mexican Revolution, in ancient Aztec culture, in the colonial era, in the farm workers movement, and in the Chicano movement. The mural's text in Spanish and English pays homage to the daughters, mothers, and grandmothers of Aztlán. The importance of muralism for the Chicano movement is widely acknowledged. These were works created in collaboration with communities, often involving members of the community in their design and execution, intended to improve the lives of Mexican Americans. But what about artists who worked in other media? And I'm thinking in particular about Chicano photography. The first comprehensive exhibition on the subject opened in February 2026 at the Cheech Marin Center for Chicano Culture, the first museum of Chicano art in Riverside, California. It was curated by Elizabeth Ferrer, and some of what I'm about to say is drawn from my essay in the catalog. What role did photography play in the Chicano movement and in enacting decolonial love? Did photography possess a particular power to envision and manifest this feeling and thereby heal the community? How did it compare to other arts traditions that grew from the Chicano movement, and how was its development unique? As I suggest in my catalog essay, Los Angeles was an important site for the development of Chicanx photography, and photography has a unique origin story. Similar to muralism and printmaking, photography emerged in the hands of community photographers. Many worked in journalism, publishing their work in La Raza, the alternative newspaper published in the East Los Angeles from 1967 to 1977. As shown in the 2017 PST exhibition and accompanying catalog, La Raza provided alternative, community-based coverage of Mexican-American neighborhoods, offering a viewpoint that was less biased and negative than the mainstream media, a counter-narrative in line with the Chicano movement. Thus, Chicanx photography in Los Angeles was rooted in a commitment to civil rights, unmasking police abuse, and presenting a positive view of the community. Additionally, and worth noting as we think about the future development of Chicanx photography, it emerged in the hands of community members rooted in journalism. Photographers such as Luis C. Garza offered powerful images that documented police brutality in LA's Chicano neighborhoods. Such photographs, many of them published in La Raza, countered the nightly news in the LA Times, where news stories criminalized community protests. We see that in a variety of images, and I'm drawing these from the 2022-23 exhibition, The Other Side of Memory, which was at the Riverside Art Museum, curated by Armando Duron, with a catalog by Melissa Richardson Banks, and I wrote a very short little essay in the end. So take a look at this or these images. Garza also documented community protests, scenes that have become iconic. Children appear in many of them, demonstrating the multi-generational nature of the Chicano movement and providing a reason for activism. In Junto Belvedere Park, we see young women holding up a large banner with the word junto, meaning together. This dates from 1971, the March for Justice in Belvedere Park gathering to protest police brutality. In contrast to many Chicanx protest scenes, this one is shot almost straight on, as opposed to at a diagonal, a compositional choice that increases the feeling of confrontation. The scene thus leads out of the picture's front plane directly to the viewer, implicating us. In the middle, a young boy turns around to look back at the march, directing our gaze. The scene of action captured here is hard to resist. You can imagine the protest cries and shouts issuing from the subject's open mouths as a young person raises his arm in the power fist salute. Garza implicates himself too. Look at the male figure in the foreground with his back turned to us, who appears to be photographing the scene. It's tempting to read this figure as a stand-in for Garza. Young activists are the subject of his most famous photo, Garza's "We Will Not Be Intimidated," also from 1971, and also taken at the Marcha por la Justicia. Garza captures the defiant mood. His beautifully composed shot, framed at a slight angle to the imagined front plane, captures the moment's dynamism. Three young people at the head of the procession carry a large manta, or banner, proclaiming, "We will not be intimidated." Garza also offered heartwarming family images of Mexican Americans, constituting the community as a counterpublic, a term I use inspired by Tatiana Reynosa. Portraits of Chicano children put a human face to neighborhoods considered to be dangerous by white Los Angelinos. These include his touching depictions, Homeboys, Aliso Pico housing projects. That's this one right here from 1972. His sympathy comes through here not only in his subject matter, but also in his matter-of-fact portrayal of two young teenage boys on the cusp of manhood from an East LA housing project. In this image, he reworks Grant Wood's American Gothic into Chicano Gothic. Other images document the Chicano women of the movement, as in this image, Chicana Power, shot again at the same rally in 1971. Garza's photographs are thus notable for their pronounced sympathy for and understanding of the Chicano community, a result of his insider perspective. We've seen this in his documentation of police brutality, his portrayals of protests, and in his dignified portraits of everyday people. By valorizing the civil rights struggles in which members of the Chicano community were engaged, and by representing them with dignity, Garza and the other photographers of La Raza, envisioned and manifested decolonial love. He did so in a photojournalistic manner, a style akin to Bernal's social realism, with its working class associations. And this would become the dominant style of Chicano art, especially in its early years, but not the only one, as we'll see. A third artistic medium closely associated with Chicano movement is printmaking. And I'm presenting my final example today by renowned Chicano activist artist Malaquías Montoya. Prints and graphics played an important role in the early Chicano movement. An inexpensive medium created in multiples, posters combined text and image. They were often bilingual and used to advertise community protests, articulate the movement's goals, and elevate ordinary people. And the image I'm going to talk about has a messy history, but it sheds light, I think, on the creation of art in the service of a movimiento Chicano. The untitled image exists in 3 different versions. It began as a poster in 1968 that Montoya produced for a Chicano student walkout at San Jose State University's graduation, and I'm not sure that it exists any longer. The following year, in 1969, he transformed it into a mixed media painting created in charcoal, acrylic, and collage, and I'm showing you that right here. In 1970, let me see what the next. In 1970, Montoya's reinterpretation of his original protest poster, i.e. that painting with collage that I showed you, was chosen to be the cover of this publication, El Plan de Santa Barbara, the Plan of Santa Barbara, the powerful and enduring manifesto of Chicano pedagogy called El Plan that articulated a blueprint for teaching ethnic studies and Chicano studies in particular. Professor Diaz of San Jose State University brought it to my attention as we collaborated on a recent project on Montoya for the journal Aslan. Montoya's artwork was the perfect cover image for El Plan, I argue, because his mixed media collage articulated the visionary nature of Chicano activism, the importance of education, and its commitment to decolonial love. Its style, however, is unusual for activist art of the period, in its denial of reality effects, his use of abstraction, and its collapse of space and time. Instead, Montoya chose a modernist approach inspired by Expressionism and Cubism, also paying homage to revolutionary Mexican muralist David Alvaro Siqueiros, as he rejected the more predictable social realism or graphic poster style. Montoya's artistic choices reveal his profound understanding of the power of visual imagery to produce radical meaning and effect revolutionary change. The work presents us with a jarring dreamscape, where reality effects, including color, are withheld, space and time are compressed. A jagged, irregular strip of paper interrupts the composition on the left, leading our eye up, highlighting the composition's vertical orientation. The artist's signature and the date 1969 are inscribed at the top in pencil. And this piece measures about 19 by 23 inches, so it's more or less the size of the poster that was created first. Let's take a closer look. The ripped edges of the collaged white paper and the thick application of pigment invite a bodily response centered on our sense of touch. In contrast to our expectations of Chicano art, and especially that aligned with the early Chicano movement, the palette is restricted to shades of black, white, and gray, with highlights picking out key passages. The composition reads from left to right, beginning with an abstract passage adjacent to the raggedly torn strip of paper. This leads us to the more representational and prominent right side, where brushstrokes morph into ghostly shapes. Here, Tower Hall, the iconic building of San Jose State University, looms above the campus. Below, 7 elongated otherworldly figures assemble. A dramatic, oversized bandolier, symbolic of the Mexican Revolution of 1910 to 1920, drapes over and enwraps Tower Hall. Montoya employed strategic highlights, singling out the bandolier, the tower, and the figures. The outer-scale bandolier is described with specificity, the bullet cartridges and buckle delineated in detail. Montoya's bandolier aligns with similar inspirational references to the Mexican Revolution in Chicano movement art, as we saw in Antonio Bernal's Del Rey mural, which includes 4 figures on the right, in the right panel, with bandoliers crisscrossing their chests. So the Adelita, Pancho Villa, Emiliano Zapata, and the bandit figure, Joaquin Murrieta. Similarly, early Chicano poster art frequently featured revolutionaries such as Zapata or Villa wearing the bandolier, as art historian and my former student Julia Fernandez has shown. The imagery and rhetoric of the Mexican Revolution provided a ready model for Chicano activists. Montoya alludes to other sources of inspiration in a blurry, ghostly passage adjacent to and behind the tower. Here, a shadowy figure rises up, head and body facing to the right. Its hand comes into focus below, holding a machete that extends across the picture plane to the right edge of the piece. And this is a detail that no one else had noticed before Ella Diaz pointed it out to me. And art historians have been looking at this and we haven't seen this. So I'm going to try to use this. So there's a shadowy face here, hand, and there's a machete that goes across the picture, this very shadowy figure. The machete is multivocal in meaning, recalling its use in agricultural labor, such as that done by farm workers, but also its role as a weapon in worker uprisings throughout the Americas and elsewhere. It also references the Mexican periodical El Machete of the Syndicate of Technical Workers, Painters, and Sculptors, co-founded by Mexican muralist and revolutionary Siqueiros in 1924 as an official publication of the Mexican Communist Party. In fact, Montoya's foreboding figure harkens back to that used on the publication's masthead. It also recalls a similar dramatic character featured in the Mexican Electricians Syndicate mural of 1939 to 40 in Mexico City, created by Siqueiros with Joseph Renaud and a team of painters. Entitled Portrait of the Bourgeoisie and painted in the building's massive stairwell, one wall features an enormous revolutionary, rifle in hand, rising up over the scene. Below the bandoliered tower and machete, Montoya depicted 7 elongated, broadly rendered figures, organized into 2 groups. They all appear to be male. The 4 on the right turn toward the left side, witnessing the other 3 moving out of the scene. These left-hand figures seem impelled by the tail end of the bandolier as its large buckle embraces the others on the right. Notice the space left between the 2 groups, an opening for us, highlighted with white brushstrokes, inviting us in. The generalized depiction of these figures may provide an additional entry point for viewer identification, encouraging us to associate ourselves with them. Montoya's figures recall the handling of the human body by expressionist artists such as Alberto Giacometti, whose bronze sculptures provide a strong point of comparison, or even the early modern artist El Greco, who was an inspiration for expressionism. El Greco's enigmatic painting, The Vision of St. John, it's about 1608, 1614, offers a thought-provoking comparison. And this is a fragment of a canvas of the opening of the 5th seal, this apocalyptic vision from the Book of Revelation. El Greco's elongated, ghostly white figures represent the souls of the saved about to put on heavenly garments. The similarity between the artistic choices made by these 3 artists invites consideration. All exploit ambiguity and imprecision, rendered through brushwork or casting, as well as a lack of detail to picture the visionary. Blurriness, in particular, has a long history in Western painting as a technique to suggest the visionary as well as temporal disjunction, as Victor Stoichita has demonstrated. These concepts are at work in Montoya's mixed media collage. In fact, the idea of the visionary is central to Montoya's work. We see how he suggests this in his suppression of color and detail, foreclosing reality effects. Instead, he employs shorthand brushstrokes to render figures and objects in deft, minimal strokes. His suggestion of 3-dimensional space is similarly limited, a reminder that this is not a visual world governed by one-point perspective. An exception is to be found in the representation of the bandolier, which in the way it envelops the tower and projects out into space does suggest 3-dimensionality. But overall, Montoya flattens a space, joining background and foreground, and in the process drawing attention to the work's surface. Look, for example, at his suggestion of sky at the picture's top. He also introduces cubist elements articulated in planes and angles, especially around the tower. Take a look at the edges of the torn strip of white paper. It replicates those abrupt diagonal jumps in space as it simultaneously orients the composition vertically. Of course, the use of collage in Western art is closely associated with the creators of Cubism, notably Picasso and Braque, so Montoya's application of it here aligns well with the Cubist space he suggests. The other artist that comes to mind is Robert Rauschenberg, who's using collage in the 50s. And Montoya had studied art at UC Berkeley, and he worked under San Francisco painter Elmer Bischoff, who worked in a figurative style inflected by abstraction, I think clearly another influence. These comparisons suggest Montoya's deep understanding of Western fine art practices and the way in which Chicano art was in tune with its latest developments. So we've seen that Montoya's palette, suggestive brushwork, and modernist space all deny the creation of reality effects. Instead, the artist evokes a ghostly, visionary world. This seems to be an odd strategy for a Chicano artist. The most precise passage here is his rendering of the bullets in the bandolier, and secondarily, Tower Hall. Comparison to the actual structure, though, reveals Montoya's artistic license. Built in 1910, Tower Hall is a prototypical example of Spanish colonial revival style by California architects George Selwyn and Edward Hemmings. Its key elements include red tile roof tiles, rounded arches, the tower structure itself, reminiscent of a church bell tower, and its original siting within the main campus quadrangle. The building manifests California's Spanish fantasy heritage, a romanticized interpretation of the state's history described by Carrie McWilliams in 1948. Promoted by Anglo boosters and settlers, this fictional view erases the violence of colonialism, including the genocide of California Indians and the theft of their lands. Tower Hall had recently been restored in 1966, 2 years before Montoya designed the 1968 poster announcing a Chicano walkout at graduation. In his 1969 painting, the artist obscures the building's pyramidal top and reduces the structure's windows from 3 to 2. Knowledge of Tower Hall's style and history sharpens our understanding of the power of Montoya's image, and in particular, his depiction of a bandolier enveloping it. Montoya thus juxtaposes the Mexican Revolution, the Spanish colonial era, and contemporary activism. He encourages us to revolt now against current tyranny as our forebears revolted against Spanish colonialism during the Revolution. On first glance, Montoya's style here seems out of line with much art created within the Chicano movement. A surprising observation given the work's early date, as well as Montoya and his wife, Leslie Salkowitz Montoya's 1980 manifesto, a critical perspective on the state of Chicano art. Their statement insisted that true Chicano art must serve the political goals of the Chicano civil rights movement, and they critiqued artists who would create works aligned with modernist notions of art for art's sake. After its publication, controversy ensued, including an infamous debate with art historian Schifra Goldman, who published a rejoinder. Yet Montoya's formal choices in this piece definitely include elements of artiness, formal choices that are decidedly modernist: the lack of color, the facture, the refusal of realistic detail, the use of collage, and his handling of space. These are visual strategies designed to draw attention to the formal qualities of Western art instead of its potential to visualize reality effects. When thinking of this collage and the original poster, thinking about that. Examination of other political posters by Montoya reveals his use of abstraction here, though, too. A good example is his Well What poster from 1969, executed in black and white, where we see a similar lack of precision and a generalized depiction of the strikers, perhaps tactics to describe an overall sense of a crowd. We also see it in the second work from 1970, Es Tiempo, It's Time. What about Montoya's other paintings? Although primarily known as a printmaker, he also created a large number of paintings. Comparison to these works, though, also reveals an inclination to reality effects, as seen, for example, in this canvas from 2014 depicting Central American migrant workers. It's entitled Women Crossing. So how should we interpret Montoya's artistic choices in this work, and how might this work change our assumptions about art created for the Chicano movement, particularly in its early years? Is this another manifestation of decolonial love? We've noted the piece's overall visionary nature, which seems perfectly suited to its use as the cover for the 1970 published version of El Plan de Santa Barbara. A visionary work such as this perfectly embodies the idealistic utopian proposal laid out in El Plan, a document establishing Chicano pedagogy and curriculum. Education was a central concern of the Chicano movement, described as, quote, the soul of Chicano studies, end quote, by Rodolfo Cunha, who's really the father of Chicano studies and who just passed away about 10 days ago. In the words of scholar Michael Sodotenko, El Plan outlines an approach that, quote, places students at the heart of Chicano studies, end quote. Montoya's pictorial choices match this new vision of a more just Chicanx future proposed in El Plan. But let's return briefly to consideration of Montoya's use of collage. We noted how his insertion of the white paper strip functioned to orient the composition vertically and how its torn edges matched the painting's spatial jumps. Paper, of course, in the context of Chicano culture, also recalls rasguachismo, the Chicano make-do aesthetic that embodies a do-it-yourself mindset and employs inexpensive materials at hand. So these would be examples. Paper also elicits key cultural forms such as piñatas or papel picado, as well as the importance of papers in a specifically Chicano worldview. That is, the value of legal forms of documentation key to immigration, the latter point made by Tatiana Reynosa and Robert Hernandez in an essay in Aslan. I'm also struck by how collage here prompts thoughts about temporality. Indeed, I tried to suggest the importance of temporality to Montoya's piece in my analysis today. In a recently published essay in the journal Aslan, which I edited at the time, Ella Diaz, American Studies scholar, suggested the notion of Chicano time, expanding on the discussion of time and capital in El Plan. And it's a concept elaborated in discussion with ethnic studies scholar and activist Elias Serna. El Plan proposes to reclaim Chicano time. That is, the decades of taxes or the capital accumulation of time spent supporting an educational system that proved useless to Chicano and Chicano students. Temporality, of course, is also an important issue in decolonial thought. How then does temporality operate in this artwork? One of the notable features of Montoya's composition is the way it encapsulates various time periods, the present, the colonial past, and the future. The artist singles out the Mexican Revolution in one of his main gestures, the depiction of the bandolier enveloping Tower Hall, the latter pointing back to the colonial era, as the structure simultaneously operates in the present as an emblem of San Jose State University, the site of the 1968 Chicano student walkout. This temporal oscillation is a hallmark of decolonial thought, one important to the concept of coloniality, that is, how the colonial past conditions our current world today. To combat coloniality, we must remember the past and use it as current inspiration to create a better future. While the figures in the foreground reference current events, the call to protest, they also point to future action, that action underscored by the ghostly revolutionary wielding the machete across the top of the image. Note here how Montoya encourages the viewer to pause. In a piece marked by verticality, he inserts two passages with horizontal emphasis, the machete and the ground line below the figures. This dream of change is inspired, Montoya suggests, by the Mexican Revolution, an idea expressed in other early movimiento artworks. The revolution plays another important role here too. It was the cause of major migration from Mexico to the U.S. in the 1920s, and therefore of immediate personal significance to many Chicano activists in the 60s and 70s, whose families crossed into the U.S. at that time. By singling out Tower Hall, a visible colonial sign and emblem of San Jose State University's campus, now enwrapped in the revolutionary bandolier, Montoya posits current revolution on campus, a radical movement in the hands of students. Because this work and the poster on which it was based served as a call to gather in front of Tower Hall, the piece simultaneously functions as a ghostly echo of the past, a call to arms in the present, and a futurist vision coming into focus. The collage paper condenses this temporal shift as it ruptures the composition and moves us from the inchoate left edge to the scene of action on the right. Its expression of vertical ascent also implies temporal progression or the imminence of action. Montoya's construction of time here disrupts Western notions of teleology that imply progress, resonating with indigenous conceptions of time, cyclical in nature, in which past and present are inextricably linked. He points to the importance of the past in order to decolonize, to various moments existing in simultaneity, to the oscillation between the Chicano movement, the Mexican Revolution, and the Spanish colonial past. He envisions a Chicano time warp. Through these carefully chosen visual strategies, Montoya opens up meaning here instead of fixing it in the way that social realism might do. Instead of prioritizing representation, an important consideration for many early Chicano artists, Montoya opts instead for ambiguity, his suggestiveness or seeming lack of clarity unlocking the sense of imminence. The ability to visually suggest imminence or impending action is a hallmark of the visual arts, a topic theorized by Nestor Garcia Canclini and Stephen Best, and one that I've considered previously. Visual images are perfectly suited to imply imminence. This happens as meanings are arrived at indirectly or suggested by what Best calls non-spatialized ways of thinking, or I would suggest representing. Montoya's mixed media collage encapsulates these ideas of imminence, of non-spatialized thinking, of art's potential to suggest and intimate. Because works of art are less restricted by notions of truth and objectivity, they can offer suggestive, futurist visions built on the power of imminence, offering us new ways of thinking, what scholar Michael Soldatenko called the possibilities of alternative imaginaries that were so important to Chicano studies. Such strategies, in addition to opening up meaning, also serve as effective means to evade censorship, as well as enunciate decolonial ways of thinking. By recognizing the injustices of the past, from the colonial era to current events, Montoya's work lines up with other examples of decolonizing art from the Chicano movement. His visionary approach, while interesting for the way it doesn't align with social realism, clearly articulates a forward-looking futurist view, similar to other works we've seen today. Other Chicano movement artists also worked in more abstract and more conceptual manners, such as Mel Casas of San Antonio, Texas, as I've suggested previously. Do these different approaches, once not rooted in social realism, also manifest decolonial love? Now, you might be wondering, and maybe since the beginning of this talk, is it not anachronistic to talk about decolonial love when referring to the Chicano movement of the 60s and 70s? Talk about decolonizing is certainly an important trend of the moment, but decolonial theorists have suggested that the fight against colonialism began at the moment of European invasion, when embodied political subjects, specifically enslaved Africans and indigenous peoples in the Americas, began decolonizing. Chicanx artists, as embodied political subjects themselves, I would argue, have similarly been engaged in decolonizing as they envisioned and fought for decolonial love from the beginning of el movimiento Chicano to today. And this brings me back to the scholarship by Yomaira Figueroa and Nelson Maldonado Torres that I referenced at the beginning. Figueroa, in her study of these two novels, in what is for me the best developed application of the concept of decolonial love, builds on her former advisor's centering of reparations. Reparations are, of course, a topic of interest right now as witness discussions about human enslavement in the US and the UK. Figueroa proposes a model of reparations that is not materialist or positivist in nature. Moving beyond apologies or financial compensation, she proposes reparations recast as decolonial love. According to her, quote, a decolonial love politic depends on a reparation of the self and a reimagining of the future. In this framework, she writes, reparations engage in intergenerational and collective acts of love. They demand an understanding of and an accounting for the long delay of colonialism, end quote. She envisions literature as a space particularly suited to reimagining decolonial reparations. And I would argue that visual images are an even better means, and I've tried to suggest that today. Allow me, by way of a conclusion today, to bring things back to a practical level. How might greater visibility and the empowerment of artists, curators, and minoritized scholars change the arts world? What kinds of reparations are necessary? Some of this work of change is already in progress as we conduct research, challenge the canon of U.S. American art, and put together new exhibitions that bring underrepresented artists to visibility. It takes place daily as we strive to diversify the ranks of art historians and curators, as we serve on hiring committees, write job descriptions, and convince colleagues to think differently about art. This work also manifests in our classrooms as we adapt what we teach, as we serve on admissions committees and offer funding to student applicants. While some of these changes are material, measurable, and quantifiable, others align with Figueroa's concept of immaterial reparations that work toward what she calls a philosophy of decolonial love. Indeed, as we move beyond Eurocentric epistemological models and strive to increase educational access, we recognize the injustices of the past in order to offer hope and healing on an individual, community, and institutional level. As Angela Davis reminded us in 2014, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. Thank you.